Hello there, this is Sohail Hasni, your host at Energypreneurs. Cheap solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles are changing the transport and energy sector as we know. I bring in guests to this podcast who will help you with their ideas to navigate this energy transition. Thank you for joining. Kyle, good morning from Manila.
Good morning. How are you going?
I'm good, thank you. You are occupying a very interesting space. You migrated from the telecom industry to EVs and you're trying to make access to EV. Maybe you introduce yourself first. It looks like a fascinating field you are in.
Yeah, I'm old enough and got enough grey hairs to know that the same movie repeats over and over again. It's interesting you raise the telco background. I feel like I've seen this movie again. What we do is we put e-mobility inside big buildings. That consists of shared electric vehicles for residents, shared e-bikes, EV charging, and excitingly, we've got a product that's trying to solve for e-bike charging in big buildings. We set that all in a platform. Our customers initially are the developers, the asset owners, the people who own and build big buildings. Eventually engage with the individual users to enable them to use our products. That's an exclusive amenity for the residents or tenants, not available to the general public. We typically say it's like having a pool in your building, but useful.
Well, that's very smart. So you are doing not only the charging, you're doing the cars as well.
We're doing cars, bikes, charging for both EVs and e-bikes. The way we describe it is we say to our developer clients and big asset owners is, look, point us to the car park and we'll look after everything to do with e-mobility. One platform, one app, one customer. We make it the best e-mobility solution in the world for users in those buildings.
Wow, I have tons of questions. This is very exciting.
Okay.
So you also have an app. I saw that you said it's a one solution that covers everything. Let's go through the solutions.
We have two sets of customers and they're quite different. The first set of customers are the people that own and operate big buildings. Now let's clarify those a little bit. So these are tall residential buildings, apartment buildings, commercial buildings, like hotels and tourism resorts and things like that. So the first part of our client set is the owners and operators of those. And we make a solution very easy for them to implement to make their buildings more attractive and to offer people sustainable transport options. Once our products are in a building, then we have client base number two. These are the residents, tenants, and sometimes guests of buildings and assets that get to use our products on demand. So if I take you through the solution, there's two sides to it. The first side of it is the critical part, which is designing, specifying, helping the builders, developers, and building owners build out a product, the infrastructure, make sure it all works properly. Once it's in place, we have 4 products that we can offer those clients in consultation with the building owners. So we can put shared electric vehicles inside those buildings. So think of private car sharing with electric vehicle. That's the way we describe it. Exactly the same manifests itself in the world of e-bikes. And I don't mean to disparage other e-bike rental companies, but our bikes are very lovely Dutch and German, in some cases, e-bikes that are very lovely e-bikes. They're in the middle to premium end of the e-bike market. All of our products, our e-mobility is unbranded. So you're not driving around with big bright colored plastic bikes or branding. We also have EV charging, and that's both shared EV charging for the residents. So there are many buildings out there that don't have the ability to offer EV charging to every parking bay because of capacity constraints or the age of the building. So the most sensible option for those guys is to provide shared electric vehicle charging, which is effectively an EV charger, typically in a visitor parking spot. The residents that have their own cars can come along, book a session, charge their car, pay for it, and go back to their own spot. We also do EV charging in people's individual parking spots. That is an awfully complicated thing to do in many buildings. There are some very significant engineering capacity constraints to think of. Then obviously the last one that we haven't yet launched officially is our e-bike charging solution. And all of that can be accessed by the resident through one app. So the resident downloads an app and they can choose to rent a Tesla in most cases. They can choose to rent an e-bike or charge their vehicle Everything sits in one app, one experience, one sign up, one payment method, and it's all in the bottom of their own building. They don't need to go to another building. They don't need to go to the street. It literally sits in the bottom of their basement and they access it on demand through an app 24 hours a day. There's no physical key exchange, no engaging with people. Everything is a digital first experience.
I think either I poked into your head or something happened. I have a house in Melbourne that I put into Airbnb. Say, hey, I can actually put a electric car. And then they said, oh, you know what? Then we can do it for the apartments as well. We have already done it. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, this is cool.
The business model is relatively predictable. We take part in the installation and design phase with the client. Then we have a model where the residents can rent these different solutions, cars, bikes, chargers on demand, and they pay a small amount through our app. We share the revenue earned back to the building on a sliding scale to make sure that the building actually gets some benefit and is aligned with us, that the more utilization it is, the better it is for the building overall.
The building also has a stake. It's not that you are just saying, okay, you just give access to your customers. You don't have to worry. You are paid in full. In your model, they are also in a revenue sharing arrangement.
They are, and we make it very clear. This is not a money-making scheme for the building. It will always be a net cost to the building. But that net cost on a monthly basis, the more it's used, the cheaper it is. So we often get people asking if they put in their building, can they make money off it? The answer is no. This is not a way for the building to make money because we own the assets, taking all the risk here. The building pays us the fee per month to use those facilities and we share the revenues back. And there's a nice equilibrium between providing a service and aligning ourselves in terms of utilization. The more it's used, the better it is for both parties.
Building can make money. It depends how much, what the asset ownership is. I'm just thinking you could just say, hey, I'll provide the infrastructure, I'll provide the knowledge, you buy the assets, you take that risk.
We definitely don't do that. One of the things we've learned over time is that we've put very close to 7 years worth of effort into building the technology, the system, the processes, the commercial construct. We do not ever offer is an unbundling of our service. We offer as a service to a building. There is no unbundling of the service available. So you can't say, I want this bit and this bit, but not this bit. We offer it as a bundled managed service end to end because ultimately we take responsibility for 24-hour customer support, all the insurance, management, maintenance. It is a very complex bundle. You start unbundling, all the wheels start falling off, to use a terrible acronym, a terrible analogy.
So how large is your footprint? How many cars have you put on the system?
At the moment, we're at about 45 vehicles deployed across Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. We're growing rapidly. We tripled our revenue last year. We're on track to do that again, if not more. And our fleet is growing pretty quickly. It's just a fact of the industry is we engage with the developers at the very early stage of their development because we have it embedded in as a very integrated amenity into what they're offering in their buildings. So we do a lot of work up front and we have to wait for the building to be built. So we have a very lovely forward committed pipeline of buildings that will be deployed in the future, but we have to wait. We work very closely with the developers, with their builders, with the building managers in that process to make sure it's a very smooth integration to get up and running.
You must be also in a position to do retrofits.
Certain products that are retrofittable. There is a significant challenge in retrofit. We're starting to do retrofits in the EV charger and we'll start to do retrofits in the e-bike charging space. Retrofit for some of the larger items is quite a challenge because there are some commercial challenges around the structure of body corporate and the strata levies and how that's all constructed. But more often the challenge is a technical electrical capacity challenge. People are often surprised by even a 5 or a 10-year-old building when we say, sorry, there's just not enough electrical capacity here. They're quite shocked and surprised. So we're working hard to close the gap on retrofit. But retrofit is a significant challenge. We're up for it. We've just started our first handful of retrofits in Q4 23, so just last quarter, and we're working our way through that.
So you are definitely going for a type 2 chargers, not for a a residential type 1 charger, no?
Yeah, so it depends. There's different definitions in the market. Almost without exception, the chargers that we've deployed so far are 22 kilowatt chargers, which we think is a decent medium between a 10 amp power point, which is useful in some cases, but incredibly slow in a high volume scenario. And very fast DC charging certainly has its place on the street side charging. So we're deploying 22 kilowatt chargers, which will give you anywhere between 7 and 11 kilowatts of charging capacity for most EVs. That is a really good middle ground to be able to get you enough range and make sure that charger is turned over enough that everyone can take advantage of.
Okay, this is super exciting. I'm sure a lot of my listeners in Asia, Australia, and US will be very interested. So you have two business models. So if somebody wants to put, say, 10, they're doing a planning at this stage. So to type to charger, they need to add the electrical capacity. Suppose they are ready for it. Where do they start? What sort of cost implications if they want to put a 10 charger, 10 cars package, something like that?
So it varies wildly. What we try and do is get involved as early in the project as possible, because in the Australian market and some other markets around the world, it's still early days. The standards, the building codes, the kind of best practices are rapidly evolving. We often see builders and developers spec a particular way that would have made sense 12 months ago or even 6 months ago for a building that is completed in 2 years' time will be very much the wrong way to do it. They paint themselves into a corner very quickly, because at this end of the scale, there's value engineering and cost engineering to a number that actually creates a significant impact later. There is a delicate balancing act between speccing it right and making it the right capacity for the future and creating a cost that is acceptable and palatable. So we come in very early in that process. There are a whole bunch of dependent factors that impact how you would spec that. Starting at one end, the network capacity available to that building at the front door from the grid is a significant consideration. In many places around, the capacity that is required to future-proof a building is typically not there. So there needs to be some cognizance of what, if any, grid upgrades are required to be able to provide the capacity required for the build. The second component is, how does the building manage the energy? Particularly if everyone's charging their EVs at the same time overnight. We already have some significant challenges on hot summer days in Australia or freezing winters in North America, where that electricity peak really creates a challenge. EVs need to be integrated into load management systems, which basically prioritize where the energy goes in those critical moments. EV capacity will become a larger portion of the overall building's capacity requirement. Having some very sophisticated thinking and rules, not only about the infrastructure in the building, but the software and the clever systems that drive them, is also a huge consideration. Not until you've solved for those can you then start talking about, I want 10 of these, 4 of these, 6 of these, 8 of these. So you have to solve it on that value chain. Putting a charger on a residential house is simple. We often get people saying, I put mine in 6 years ago and it works great. You put it in a house. When you start to put it in big buildings with 200, 300, 500 apartments, the level of complexity is an order of magnitude 2 or 3 times greater and requires sophisticated solutions. It's not as straightforward as saying you've got to go through this process, and there's a lot of value engineering included.
You have not answered yet. I'll ask you even more specific, because if it's a 22 kilowatt charger, average person will not deplete more than 25 kilowatt hour a day, maybe even less, because the car is 60 to 65 kilowatt hour battery, right? So if you have 10 of those, 10 Tesla Model Y will cost you about $700,000. I think this charger, maybe maximum, this destination charges $10,000 to $15,000. So overall, it's a $1 million installation with your installation cost over $100,000.
That's just the bits you can see. Most of the cost sits behind the chargers.
No, I'm just saying that. So if it's $1 million, then your type 1 customer coming in, who's the building owner, and what proportion of the initial cost roughly do they pay 20, 30% upfront? Because you don't want to take the entire cost, and it can be a stranded assets, right? So there must be a split. And then, of course, and the rest of it income. And you said I am not going to tell them, even if they want to pay everything, I'm not going to let them. I said, no, I bring an ecosystem. I want to be, right? So what proportion will let them pay, or they don't pay anything?
They pay most of it.
Okay. I think the cars?
It depends on the model. We have a couple of different models where there's CapEx heavy or an OpEx heavy model, and it just changes how the dynamics work. The short answer is the way we treat this is very much a swimming pool or gardens or any other amenity in the building. There's a specification, it's included in the build cost of the building, and then there's a service that's overlaid over the top of that. Look, the short answer is most of it. The way we structure it for the building is we call it an EMAS fee, a monthly e-mobility as a service. So there's a monthly fee per item that we levy to the building to run the service, which includes everything that sits around it on an ongoing basis, including the tech and insurance and customer support and everything that needs to be operated. And then that is an ongoing monthly fee to the building, depending on how many cars, how many chargers, how many bikes. They can build their own modular approach to what they think is valuable for the building. And that's why we share back some of the revenue on the revenue side. So the more it's used, the cheaper the fee is on a monthly basis.
This is amazing. Earlier, you mentioned 300 apartments, at least $300 million, if not 400 or 500, if you're in Sydney. So 1 million extra when you're building is nothing, but the amount of marketing, other benefits you can bring to the residents, the value is tremendous.
Yeah, that's right. Look, there are some super interesting dynamics in the new build space where a service like ours really significantly helps the developer reduce CapEx indirectly or directly. If you have a fleet of vehicles available to be used, then you can lobby the planning authorities to build less car parks, which is subsequently worth a lot of money to you as a developer. There is a balance point. We're aware that you can't say no car parks to anybody. We've got 3 bikes downstairs, so there's no car parking. That's completely unrealistic, but there is a very interesting dynamic that enables developers to bring something else to the table in that planning phase that adds a lot of value. Our vision of the world is that if you live in a big apartment building, you don't need to own a car. We're offering our users the ability to be car ownership free, which in most places in the world is either the first or second most expensive thing you do on a monthly basis in your life. If you can remove that and move it to on demand, and then imagine going down and in your own elevator, pressing B1, coming out, and there's a bunch of cars, a bunch of bikes, and a bunch of options for you on demand. That's how we see the world evolving. This is very applicable to dense urban environments. This is not for the far-flung suburbs. This is not for the small regional centers. We know that. But in those rapidly urbanizing large cities, this makes a lot of sense. This ticks a lot of boxes. Developers don't want to have to dig very big holes, put lots of parking in for 500 apartments. And the users themselves, this is a way of them going to an on-demand solution without compromising the quality of vehicle, without having to find it in the street, without having to have a poor user experience. They can have a very high quality user experience without having to own a car, saving them tons of money and really suiting that urban modern lifestyle.
Quite fascinating. Now I'm just thinking, are you using Nissan Leaf by any chance?
To be really honest, that's probably one of the few that we're not using.
Because the reason I'm saying Nissan Leaf is one of the cars that has the vehicle to grid. So
in our market in Australia, it's the only car that has a vehicle to grid.
There's only one. I saw the YouTube
in
as well.
Australia, there's vehicle to load, which is a little bit different again, but all this gets incredibly interesting in a world where there's a fully activated vehicle to grid system. There is some significant effort to make that work. Now, in a world that's at the moment quite far away, you might have 10 EVs downstairs and we have a booking system. We have a predictive model. We know when the cars are used. We know where the peak times are, where the low times are. In a relatively distant future, we can very clearly see a scenario where the batteries in the car are effectively used to power the building and even arbitrage the grid. But there are some very exciting developments in the future.
Yeah, even in the shorter term, I'm just thinking of the Asian Development Bank headquarters here. The peak demand is about 3 megawatt. We put about 700 kilowatt solar panel 10 years
700
back.
kilowatt, that's a lot of kilowatts of solar.
Yeah, there's about 3,000 to 4,000 people in the building at any given time. It's a large footprint. ADB fleet has more than 15 cars. If those were on your system, ADB also has most likely backup gen sets to run. So these cars can be the backup gen set. If you remove that, that is quite significant. You don't have to supply the grid, but just to take the emergency load, that's significant. Have you started thinking along those lines?
We've started thinking, developing along those lines. There are some significant constraints. And the first and foremost constraint here is availability and economic viability of vehicle to grid chargers. There are only a few on the market. They're extraordinarily expensive at the moment. We're certain that the price will come down over time as volume changes. And there's one OEM that really, if they decide to activate vehicle to grid across their fleet, it will make a humongous difference overnight. So we're watching very closely there. That is exactly the world we see, is that e-mobility in the building is not an afterthought that your mate's brother's friend's electrician threw in for you. It's actually integrated part of the building. It's an integrated part of the energy system. It's an integrated part of how the building can live and breathe and operate. We've got to take baby steps, but certainly we definitely see a future where a lot of this technology is used to really make a big difference in the energy landscape.
So you're waiting to test out the V2L on the Cybertruck, right?
Yeah, I don't expect the Cybertruck in the Australian market anytime soon. Apparently, it's simply too wide for our lane size.
But it has the V2L.
But V2L is an interesting technology. We've certainly played with it with BYDs and a couple of other brands. It's interesting as it's low amperage, it's low current at the moment, which is fine. But there are some hugely exciting developments coming down the track. And I think if we're here in maybe 5 or 10 years' time having the same conversation, I think there'll be some amazing things happening in that space for sure.
So what's your scale-up plan? You said you are doing a few in Australia. So the Australia-wide market is huge. Then you have the whole Asia-Pacific market. I think you just really hit the nail on the spot. That's what people have been talking about: shared batteries, community batteries, and solving all of those, saying, hey, why you buy a car in the first place? We'll share. Electric companies should do this eventually. I see you getting bought out by some of the big electric car companies. Electric service providers, they're desperate for revenues. If they have been leasing meters, why can't you lease up the whole things? So what's your franchising plan?
So at the moment, no. We've spent our existence as a company, we've been operating about 7 years. The first couple of years we spent deeply diving into the energy industry itself. In fact, we built products around energy optimization and demand response. We started building our tech for Ohmie Go on the e-mobility platform in about 2017 and launched our first pilot 2018. We had COVID in the middle where we invested heavily in building a lot of our own tech. One of the things that makes us relatively unique is we build our own tech. Every line of code, every piece of hardware, everything we deploy is ours. We clearly don't make the cars. The hardware on the cars isn't ours, and the charger itself. But all of the orchestrating hardware, software is all developed ourselves. So we started to launch commercially in buildings. I think our first building was 2021. And that we're on a very rapid scale up phase. We have invested heavily in process automation. So what we're trying to do here is, before we go too far and wide into other markets, we want to really perfect, to the extent possible, our product here. We want to be able to do it in a resource light way, very intuitive customer offerings, support tools, and all the back end stuff that make these things tick properly. And we've been testing that over the last year and a half. Some of the AI tools out there that we've been digging into over the last 12 months are really proving a bit of a game changer, particularly in the load management space, behind the scenes, but very critical orchestration architecture. For us, it's all about getting that right first. We're now just embarking on the process of exploring other markets and cities. Our model is very much a city by city model. There is some wild and crazy, interesting stuff happening in the Middle East at the moment. It's very exciting. And there are probably more mature sort of car share, bike share markets in places like Europe and the US. Again, we would probably pick off a city, try that, do our very best, make it work, perfect it, and then work out how to scale into other places. So that's certainly our objective for this year, is to identify our next landing spot. At the moment, we're not looking at a franchise style model. It is a complex system. and customer experience is everything for us. So at this stage, we're not really prepared to outsource that customer experience component. We want to be able to offer that, but certainly happy to partner with the developers and other people looking to help with some parts of that value chain. But at the end of the day, we really want to be an Ohmie Go service that people feel.
So how does people reach you if they want to find out a bit more? I'm sure you got a lot of people excited through this discussion.
So the best way, honestly, is ohmiego.com is our website. It gives you a bit of a flavor of what we have. We regularly post on places like LinkedIn. We see LinkedIn as a pretty good communication and industry education platform. We try and help people understand some of the issues around deployments. In early days of any technology deployment, there's a lot of misunderstanding or preconceived ideas or challenges there. We would like to be able to just educate the marketplace, let them understand what works. Whether they use us or someone else, at least they go into a conversation educated and understand how things work for their own benefit. So LinkedIn is probably the best place, or our website, reach out, and happy to engage in a conversation.
Yeah, I used to work for the Essential Services Commission in Victoria many years ago during Kenneth government privatization. Actually, I was in the first team who established the regulatory office. So from then on, I had a soft corner for the regulators, and I talked to regulators in the Philippines also. Last month, we were talking about electric vehicle, what their plans are. Because I thought, and I still think, just looking at your model, maybe your ultimate approach as well will be for these countries to regulation to come in and put a thresholds. And if your building has X megawatt capacity, you must have a system in place to get approval.
In fact, in Australia, that's happened to an extent. Last year, there was an update to the National Construction Code that mandated a lot of these changes. And look, it's a very functional spec, and there's still a lot of work to be done to understand how to implement those changes. But there is a lot of work taking place in that space. And I think NCC 22, it's called, is the National Construction Code. The updates there, I think, are pretty instructive of how this will play out. And I think you're absolutely spot on. There will need to be a more coordinated approach to this in the future. At the moment, it's the Wild West days of everyone and anything. I think that will happen. That will change pretty rapidly. And I think to the benefit of the end users, there needs to be some standardization and interoperability and coordination and thinking around how all this stuff works. I think you're spot on there. I think it's started, but certainly there are some regulatory bodies that need to catch up and some that are ahead of the pack. But I think ultimately we'll get there. And back to your very first question, this is exactly what happened in the telco space and the internet space. So for me, I always say I've seen this movie before, and I think it's very interesting stages at the moment.
So every country that you are planning to go, you said you will go city. So you have to go and look at the landscape and also talk to the city mayor or whoever.
Yeah, look, to understand the regulatory construct is extremely important, of course. The benefit here is that everything we do happens on private land. So we just have to be aware and cognizant of those regulatory guidelines. But we're not in public spaces. So it's very much making sure we fit and meet the regulatory requirements in each place, but we don't need to directly engage for any regulatory change. We just fit within the rules and make it make sense for everybody.
I'm not talking about change. I'm just talking about in terms of educating the regulators.
Oh, yeah. The education piece is far and wide.
They actually make an informed decision. Most time they can't because these things are moving so fast, right?
That's right. And look, to be honest, that's the role we're quite keen to play. We really want to educate the whole value chain on what best practice looks like, how to do it, what the pitfalls are. I'm not alone. There are plenty of other people in the market who have huge amounts of experience. But I think it is important that people that spend all day, every day thinking about this and doing this are listened to and understood to prevent going down a particular path for a particular vested interest. It all gets very hard and complicated. So I think there is a really big education piece that needs to take place across the whole value chain.
Yeah, continuing on that line, first week of June, ADB hosts Asia Clean Energy Forum. I think it would be amazing. I can talk to my colleagues back in ADB. If you're interested, ADB invites policymakers across Asia. I think 2,000 to 3,000 people attend.
I'm happy to understand what it looks like. It can be part of that education process if we can add some value for sure.
Yeah, wow, this is really fascinating. So what's your vision? You must have a huge commitment or a plan going ahead?
Yeah, again, I'll point to my grey hair and say I've been around long enough to know that in a rapidly developing marketplace, you can make all the plans you like, but frankly, things change very rapidly. So I think for us to be adaptable is probably the most important thing. But what do I see? I really think we have a set of technologies and products that can really make significant change for urban cities. We would like to see how far we can push that, how far we can make that make sense. There's a bunch of stakeholders here. We want cities to be better planned and more enjoyable to live in, arguably less cars, less traffic, less chaos. There's the development side. We want to see sustainable development that enhance people's lives. And on the user side, I think having a suite of products and changing your paradigm completely around personal car ownership. I'm of the generation where owning a car is a rite of passage. We get a pretty visceral reaction to saying you don't need to own a private car from a lot of people, probably in my age bracket more. But you talk to young people, and young people don't necessarily want to or need to own a car. It seems a huge inconvenience and a financial anchor on their plans. So we see a world where 5-10 years from now, the mindset of the urban dweller has changed and they don't need to own a car. These beautiful energy services are integrated into a building to make the entire city about a more efficient place. You can do some amazing things, and we can start to rely on intelligence within the city rather than build things in the same old way we have.
You obviously know Tony Seba's prediction that soon, because of autonomous and because of people like you and your business and your ideas, eventually all these car parks will be demolished because there will be no market for it. So you are putting one brick in that.
Yeah, I think so. I am very much not a black and white binary kind of person. I think this will be a very slow, gradual transition of how we do things. Not every technology suits every person in every circumstance. I have the same arguments with friends and family and colleagues about, I'll never go to an EV because I want to go camping on the weekend or whatever the argument is. And my response is, that's totally fine. Different use cases will suit different people at different points in time. It's a transition, not a game with a final score. We just keep gradually improving as quickly as we can, but we keep gradually improving. Different people will come on the journey at different times, and there are those that it will suit early and those that will suit late.
Yeah, I like that. You said it's not a game winner that someone wins. It's a transition, but at the end of the day, if you are not in the game, you might be sitting on a lot of stranded assets. That's the losing part.
I think that will become right in different sectors and different parts of the economy for sure. And I think to expand on that, the exciting thing about some of those ASEAN countries is, again, going back to the telco and internet experience I have, a lot of the developments taken place over the last 10 years in those countries have enabled the countries to leapfrog a lot of technologies and go to the very best technologies. I think there is a similar opportunity here in the mobility and energy space for a lot of nations, developing or not. If you don't have a huge legacy to deal with, you can do some really fantastic things. We're very excited about that.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I really learned a lot. Do you want to say a few more words or anything that I have not asked?
I'm grateful for taking the time and the interest in what we're doing. And like I said, if anyone's interested in chatting with us, more than happy to chat and see if we can help in any way.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs. To continue listening to this conversation, please visit us at Energypreneurs. Thank you. See you next time.